The full moon hung low and silver over the kingdom, so close Alara could have sworn it watched her. Cold air bit at her bare shoulders as she stood at the altar carved from ancient stone, firelight dancing across thousands of upturned faces. The pack had gathered, wolves from every corner of the realm, their eyes gleaming with something between reverence and hunger. The Alpha King stood beside her, close enough that his shadow swallowed hers whole. "Repeat the words," the elder commanded, his voice carrying across the clearing like thunder. Ilara's lips moved. The vows tasted of ash. "I bind myself to the Alpha King, to serve his rule, to bear his legacy, to honor his command above all else." The crowd erupted. Howls split the night, primal and deafening. Someone thrust the crown forward, silver wrought with thorns, cold as winter's first breath. The Alpha King took it with hands that had never trembled, never softened. He placed it on her head without ceremony, without tenderness. The weight of it made her neck ache immediately. His fingers lingered at her temple for a heartbeat. She waited for warmth, for some flicker of the man who had courted her with careful words and promises of partnership. But when she looked up, his eyes were already elsewhere, scanning the crowd, measuring their approval, calculating his power. "My queen," he said, loud enough for the pack to hear. The title sounded like a chain snapping shut. The ceremony blurred. Incense smoke curled thick and cloying. Drums pounded. The elders smeared ceremonial oils across her wrists. Protection, they said, though from what they never specified. Wolves shifted in the shadows, their forms rippling between human and beast, testing the moon's pull. The Alpha King's hand found her waist, gripping hard enough to guide, to control. When he kissed her, the crowd roared. His mouth was cold. The feast stretched endlessly. Alara sat at the high table, the crown a vice against her skull, and watched the kingdom celebrate. Meat and mead flowed freely. Wolves danced with abandon, their joy wild and infectious. Joy she couldn't touch, couldn't taste. The Alpha King spoke to counselors and warriors, his voice a constant rumble of strategy and dominance. He never looked at her, not once. A young wolf approached, breathless with excitement. "My queen, what an honor." "The queen is not receiving well-wishers." The Alpha King cut in smoothly, not even glancing at Alara. "She requires rest." The wolf retreated, apologetic. Alara's hands curled in her lap, nails biting crescents into her palms. She hadn't been tired. She hadn't been asked. "Smile," the Alpha King murmured beside her, still facing forward. "They're watching." She smiled. The muscles in her face ached from it. Hours later, when the moon began its descent and the fires burned low, he finally stood. His hand closed around her wrist. Not her hand, never her hand, and he pulled her toward the castle. The pack parted like water, bowing, murmuring blessings. The crown shifted with each step, its thorns catching in her hair. The great doors slammed shut behind them. Silence fell like a burial shroud. The Alpha King released her wrist and strode ahead, his footsteps echoing through marble halls. Alara followed because there was nowhere else to go. Tapestries depicted ancient victories, wolves tearing through enemies, kings standing over conquered lands. Every image was conquest. Every thread was dominance. He stopped at the royal chamber, pushing the door open with one hand. The room was vast and cold, decorated in silvers and blacks. A bed large enough to lose herself in dominated the space. It looked more like a stage than a sanctuary. "Remove the crown," he said without turning. "You'll damage it." Alara lifted it from her head slowly, carefully. Her scalp throbbed where the thorns had pressed. She set it on the vanity with shaking hands. The Alpha King was already unbuttoning his ceremonial coat, his movements efficient and detached. The council expects an heir within the year. We'll begin fulfilling that expectation immediately. He glanced at her then, finally, and his eyes held nothing. No desire, no affection, not even cruelty. just expectation. This is duty, Alara. Your purpose now is legacy. My legacy. Her throat closed. And love? The question hung in the air between them, fragile and foolish. He smiled, thin, patronizing. Love is a luxury for common wolves. We are not common. He approached her, and she forced herself not to step back. His hand cupped her jaw, tilting her face up toward his. You are queen because I chose you. You will remain queen because you obey. Do you understand? She wanted to say no, wanted to scream it. Yes, she whispered instead. Good. He released her and turned toward the bed. Duty, obedience, legacy. Remember those words, Alara. They're the only ones that matter now. He left her standing there, the crown gleaming mockingly on the vanity, firelight catching in its cruel silver thorns. Alara looked at her reflection in the darkened window. A queen stared back, beautiful, adorned, utterly silent. She had been crowned ruler of a kingdom where her voice would never matter. The days bled together after that first night, each one a careful performance, each smile another piece of herself she buried deeper. Alara learned quickly that being queen meant being seen but never heard, present but never consulted, admired but never respected. The Alpha King rose before dawn each morning, dressing in silence. He never woke her, never spoke except to issue instructions. The council meets at midday. You are not needed. Wear the blue gown tonight. It photographs well. Smile more during public appearances. You look ungrateful. She became an expert at nodding. 3 weeks into her reign, Alara tried to attend a council meeting. She'd heard whispers of border disputes, of wolves going hungry in the outer territories. She thought perhaps she could help, could offer perspective, could be useful. The guards stopped her at the chamber doors. The Alpha King's orders, my queen, the larger one said, eyes downcast. Council matters are not for... He hesitated, searching for kind words. Are not appropriate for your attention. Behind the doors, she heard the king's voice, strong and certain, making decisions that would shape lives. Her crown felt like it was crushing her skull. She turned away before the guards could see her hands shake. At formal dinners, visiting alphas spoke over her as if she were furniture. They addressed the king, negotiated treaties, discussed pack politics. When they acknowledged her at all, it was with patronizing compliments about her beauty, her grace, her decorative presence. The Alpha King never corrected them. He'd nod along, sometimes adding his own observations as if she weren't sitting right there. Yes, she photographs exceptionally well. Good breeding. Good breeding. Like a prized mare. Alara stopped trying to speak at public gatherings. What was the point? Her words evaporated into air that no one breathed. The pack adored her from a distance. Common wolves bowed when she passed, whispered prayers for her health, left flowers at the castle gates. They saw a fairy tale, a beautiful queen beside a powerful king. They didn't see the separate bedrooms, the king's indifference, the way he flinched when she accidentally touched his hand during a procession. They didn't see her eating meals alone in chambers too large for one person. 4 months in, an old wound in the Western Territories erupted into violence. Alara overheard servants whispering, 3 wolves dead, families displaced, children orphaned. She spent a sleepless night composing a proposal for aid, for mediation, for mercy. Her hands cramped from writing. She brought it to the king's study in the morning, hope fluttering fragile in her chest. He didn't look up from his correspondence. What is this? A proposal. For the Western Territories. I thought if we... You thought. He set down his pen, finally meeting her eyes. Since when do you think about matters of state, Alara? The dismissal in his tone made her stomach twist. I'm queen. These are my people too. You are queen in title. He picked up her pages, scanned them with theatrical disinterest, then set them aside. In function, you are a symbol. Symbols don't think. They simply exist beautifully. He returned to his letters. The Western territories will be handled appropriately, by those qualified to handle them. She stood there, frozen, as he continued writing. He'd already forgotten her. That night, during a formal ball celebrating some military victory she hadn't been told about. Everything shattered. Elara stood beside the Alpha King's throne, never her own throne, just beside his, watching wolves dance and drink and celebrate. A visiting dignitary approached, drunk and bold. "Such a pretty little queen," he slurred, too loud. "Tell me, does she do anything besides stand there looking lovely?" Laughter rippled through nearby wolves. Elara's cheeks burned. The Alpha King smiled. Actually smiled. "She does exactly what she's meant to do, which is more than sufficient." More laughter. Louder this time. The dignitary leaned closer, breath reeking of wine. Shame to waste such beauty on mere decoration. Perhaps she needs a king who'd actually... Careful. The Alpha King's voice dropped, dangerous. But his anger wasn't for her honor. "You insult my possession. You insult me." Possession. The word hung there, ugly and true. Elara felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been fracturing slowly for months, held together only by desperate hope. It splintered completely now, sharp pieces falling away into nothing. The king never looked at her. He was already discussing trade routes with another alpha, the insult forgotten, Elara forgotten. She was invisible even when standing directly in the light. Hours later, back in her chamber, Elara stood before the vanity. The crown sat there as it always did, silver and thorns, beautiful and terrible. She'd worn it every day, felt its weight reshape her spine, let it mark her as owned. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, not to place it on her head, to study it. Really study it. It was just metal, just silver shaped into submission. She set it down carefully, precisely, and backed away. For the first time since her coronation, she saw herself without it. Just Elara. Just a woman whose voice had been stolen one silence at a time. The realization settled over her like winter frost. If she stayed, she would disappear completely. Not die. Something worse. She'd become the ornament they'd already decided she was. Hollow and silent, and beautifully, perfectly empty. She couldn't survive that. She wouldn't. Elara moved before doubt could paralyze her. The castle slept in the hours before dawn, guards drowsy at their posts, servants still abed. She stripped away the silk gown that marked her as queen, hands shaking as she pulled on the simplest dress she owned, a plain gray thing she'd brought from her old life and never worn. It hung loose now. She'd lost weight in the months of performance and pretense. No jewelry, no crown, nothing that gleamed or announced or claimed. The corridors stretched endlessly, shadows pooling in corners like watching eyes. Every footstep echoed too loud. Elara held her breath past the king's chambers, past the throne room with its cold grandeur, past tapestries depicting conquest and control. The servants' entrance hung unguarded, too small, too mundane for anyone important to use. She slipped through it into autumn night. The forest swallowed her immediately. Trees pressed close, their branches clawing at her hair, her dress, her skin. She'd never been in the woods without guards forming a protective barrier, without paths cleared and dangers eliminated. Now thorns caught her ankles. Roots tried to trip her. The darkness was absolute, moon hidden behind thick canopy. She ran anyway. Branches whipped her face. Her lungs burned. Behind her, the castle faded into memory. No alarms raised, no one noticing her absence yet. She was so inconsequential they wouldn't realize she'd gone until morning, when they needed her to stand somewhere and look decorative. By then, she'd be gone. Hours blurred together. Dawn came reluctantly, gray and cold. Alara's feet bled inside inadequate slippers. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She'd forgotten that queens didn't pack provisions, didn't think about food, because it simply appeared. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, indifferent to her titles, her suffering, her very existence. She'd never felt more alive. Exhaustion finally drove her to her knees, beside a half-frozen stream. She drank with cupped hands, water so cold it made her teeth ache. Her reflection stared back, hair tangled with leaves, face scratched and pale, eyes wild with something between terror and liberation. No crown, no silk, no possession, just Alara. The sound of footsteps froze her mid-breath. "Easy," a voice said, male, calm, utterly unhurried. "I'm not going to hurt you." She spun, heart hammering. A man stood several paces away, hands visible and empty. He was older than the king by perhaps a decade, weathered in a way that spoke of labor rather than luxury. Plain clothes, worn but clean, kind eyes that didn't demand or assess or own. "You're hurt," he observed, nodding toward her bleeding feet. Alara stood, swaying. "I'm fine." "You're not." He tilted his head, studying her without judgment. "When's the last time you ate?" She couldn't remember. Days? The formal dinner where she'd sat invisible? Her silence was answer enough. The man sighed, but it wasn't exasperated, just resigned to helping. "There's a village an hour's walk from here. I've got a workshop there. You can rest, get those feet wrapped, eat something warm." He paused. No questions asked. Suspicion flared. "Why would you help me?" "Because you need help." He said it like it was the simplest truth in the world. "I'm Matthias. I'm a carpenter. And you look like you've been running from something that doesn't deserve to catch you." The honesty in his voice made something in her chest constrict painfully. "I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to." Matthias turned, assuming she'd follow. "Come on. Before you collapse and I have to carry you. My back's not what it used to be." She followed because she had nowhere else to go. The village was small, built around a central square where early morning traders were setting up modest stalls. No grand castle, no bowing wolves. Just people living ordinary lives, bartering, laughing, complaining about weather and prices and neighbors. No one looked twice at Alara. She was invisible here too, but it felt like freedom. Matthias's workshop sat at the village edge, attached to a small cottage. Wood shavings covered the floor, and the air smelled of sawdust and something baking. He gestured her toward a chair by the fire. "Sit. I'll get bandages." Alara sat because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Warmth from the hearth seeped into her bones, melting tension she'd carried for months. Matthias returned with clean cloth, a basin of warm water, and bread still steaming from the oven. He knelt, actually knelt, and began cleaning her feet with gentle efficiency. No one had knelt for her in the castle. They'd bowed, prostrated, performed subservience. But this was different. This was service without performance, help without hierarchy. "You don't have to tell me what you're running from," Matthias said quietly, wrapping her feet with careful precision. "But you're safe here, for as long as you need." Alara's throat closed. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to." He finished the bandaging and sat back on his heels. "I know scared when I see it, and I know no one deserves to look that haunted." He stood, placing the bread within her reach. "Eat, then sleep. The spare room's small, but it's warm and the door locks from the inside." From the inside. Control given, not taken. That night, Alara lay in a bed smaller than her vanity had been, wrapped in blankets that smelled of lavender and honest work. No silk sheets, no gilded cage, no crown waiting to crush her skull come morning. For the first time in months, She slept without fear. Morning came with the smell of coffee and sawdust. Ilara woke slowly, confused by the absence of silk against her skin, by the smallness of the room, by the sound of someone humming off-key in another part of the cottage. Then memory returned. The forest, the escape, Matthias kneeling to bandage her feet. She was free. The realization should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt fragile, like something that might shatter if she breathed wrong. Matthias was at his workbench when she emerged, hands steady as he planed a piece of oak. He glanced up, smiled briefly, and returned to his work. No questions, no demands, just quiet acceptance. "There's coffee," he said. "Bread's in the basket. Help yourself." Ilara poured coffee with shaking hands. She'd never poured her own coffee, never decided how much she wanted, never been trusted with something so simple. It tasted bitter and perfect. "What are you making?" she asked, because the silence felt too comfortable, too dangerous. "Cradle. For the blacksmith's daughter. Baby's due next month." His hands moved with practiced grace, coaxing the wood into curves. "You can stay as long as you need. But if you want to help around the cottage, I won't refuse. Gets lonely talking to lumber all day." It wasn't a command, just an invitation. Ilara stayed. Days became weeks. She learned to cook, burned soup twice before Matthias gently showed her how to control the heat. She swept floors, mended tiers and curtains, discovered muscles she didn't know she had. Her hands, once soft and useless, developed calluses. Her back ached pleasantly from honest work. Matthias never asked about her past. He'd mention his own sometimes. A wife lost to fever 3 winters ago. A son who'd moved to the coast. The loneliness that crept in during long evenings. He spoke like she was worth confiding in, like her thoughts mattered. One afternoon, while she helped sand a table he was building, he said, "You smile more now. When you first came, you looked like you'd forgotten how." Ilara's hands stilled. "I think I had. Whoever made you forget." He met her eyes, steady and certain. They were a fool. Something warm unfurled in her chest, something she'd thought the king had killed. The bond grew in small moments, Matthias teaching her to identify different types of wood by scent and grain. Walking to the village market together, his presence solid and undemanding beside her. The way he'd leave the last piece of bread for her without comment, how she'd started brewing coffee the way he preferred without being asked. One evening, as autumn deepened toward winter, they sat by the fire. Matthias was sketching a design for a bookshelf. Ilara was attempting to knit, badly, tangling yarn more than creating anything useful. "I was married once," she said suddenly. The words escaped before she could stop them. Matthias didn't look up from his sketch. Was he cruel? He was empty. She set down the knitting, staring at her hands. Like I was decoration he'd purchased and regretted. He never hit me, never even raised his voice. He just erased me, one silence at a time. That's its own kind of cruelty. Matthias's pencil stilled. "You deserve better than erasure, Ilara." He'd never asked her name. She'd offered it weeks ago, and he'd accepted it without prying for a surname, a title, a history. What do I deserve? The question came out smaller than she intended. Matthias looked at her then, really looked. To be seen, to be heard, to take up space without apologizing for it. He smiled, soft and sad. To be loved because of who you are, not what you represent. Ilara's breath caught. "Matthias, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm just telling you the truth. You're worth more than you were taught to believe." That night, she lay awake thinking about the difference between being claimed and being chosen, between possession and partnership. The next morning, a traveling merchant brought news to the village square. Alara was buying vegetables when she heard the gossip spreading like wildfire. Chaos in the capital. King's authority crumbling. Queen disappeared months ago. Her blood turned to ice. The merchant was holding court, clearly enjoying the attention. Border territories in open rebellion. The council's fracturing. They say the king's losing his mind. Blames everyone for the queen's disappearance. He leaned in conspiratorially. Some say she was the only thing holding the kingdom together. Without her, his rules revealed for what it always was. Tyranny pretending at nobility. Alara bought her vegetables with numb hands and walked back to the cottage in a daze. She'd thought leaving would free her. She hadn't considered it might break him, or that breaking him might break the kingdom. Guilt twisted in her stomach. All those wolves, the common ones who'd left flowers, who'd looked to her with hope, were suffering because she'd run. But what was the alternative? Return to erasure? Sacrifice herself to stabilize a tyrant's reign? Matthias found her standing in the workshop, staring at nothing. What's wrong? She told him everything then, the truth she'd been holding back. Queen, crown, escape. The king who'd owned her and the kingdom now falling apart without her. Matthias listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Do you want to go back?" he asked finally. "No." The answer came instantly, certain. "But I don't know if I have the right to stay away." "You have every right." His hand found hers, warm and solid. "Your life is yours, Alara. Not his. Not the kingdom's. Yours." That evening, as the sun set blood-red through the trees, Alara felt it. A prickling awareness, like being watched. She stepped outside, scanning the forest edge. Nothing moved. But she knew, with the certainty of prey sensing a predator, that he was coming. The Alpha King had found her. He arrived the next morning, alone. No guards, no ceremony, no power display. Just a man walking through the village square like his presence didn't command armies, didn't topple kingdoms. But wolves turned their heads as he passed, instinct recognizing what reason didn't. Apex predator, alpha authority, danger wrapped in human skin. Alara saw him from the cottage window. Her hands froze mid-motion, cup of coffee suspended between table and lips. Matthias appeared beside her, following her gaze. "That's him." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Do you want me to send him away?" She almost laughed. Matthias, kind carpenter with gentle hands, offering to face down the Alpha King. The offer wasn't empty bravado. He meant it, would stand between her and danger without hesitation. "No." Alara set down the coffee, surprised by how steady her hands were. "I need to do this." She stepped outside before courage could fail her. The king stopped 10 paces away. Up close, he looked diminished somehow. Still powerful, still commanding, but hollowed out. Shadows bruised the skin beneath his eyes. His clothes, though fine, hung slightly loose. He looked like a man who'd forgotten to eat, to sleep, to care for anything beyond finding what he'd lost. Alara. Her name in his mouth sounded wrong, too intimate, too late. "Your Majesty." She kept her voice level, formal. The distance of strangers. Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "I've been searching for months." "I know. The kingdom is falling apart." "I know that too." He took a step closer. She didn't retreat, but she didn't soften either. He seemed to notice, seemed to understand that the woman who'd once flinched at his indifference was gone. "I made mistakes." The words came out rough, unpracticed. "I treated you like a possession, like you were something to be owned instead of—" He stopped, struggling. "I didn't see you. Not really. Not until you were gone. And now you see me?" Alara's voice carried no malice, just curiosity. "Because I left? Because the kingdom's crumbling without its decorative queen?" Because I was a fool. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of him. Pine and power and cold mountain air. I thought strength meant control, that ruling meant dominating. I was wrong. Then he did something that shattered every expectation, every memory of the man who'd crowned her in silence. He knelt, the Alpha King, ruler of territories, commander of wolves, bent knee before her on common dirt in a village square where no one bowed, no one scraped, no one performed subservience. "Come back," he said, and his voice cracked. "Please, I can change. I will change. The throne is yours, truly yours. Power, authority, everything I denied you. The kingdom needs you. I need you." Alara looked down at him. This man who'd spent months teaching her that her voice didn't matter, that her thoughts were worthless, that she existed only to be seen and never heard. She felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just clarity. "You don't need me," she said quietly. "You need what I represented. Stability. The illusion of partnership. Something to make your rule look less like tyranny. That's not... It is." She crouched down, meeting his eyes at level. "You had months with me, Your Majesty. Months to see me, to hear me, to treat me like a partner instead of property. You chose not to. Every single day, you chose erasure over effort. I was wrong. Yes, you were." She stood, putting distance between them again. But love doesn't arrive only after loss. Respect doesn't come only when it's convenient. You're not offering me partnership now because you value me. You're offering it because you lost me, and losing me cost you something. The king rose slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes, understanding that this wouldn't end the way he'd planned. The mate bond is not chains. Alara's voice strengthened. Fate doesn't obligate me to accept cruelty. It doesn't require me to sacrifice myself for someone who never saw my worth until it walked away. Alara, please. I am no longer your queen. The words rang clear, final. I'm no longer your wife, your possession, your anything. I'm just Alara, and Alara chooses differently. The king's face twisted. Anguish, rage, disbelief cycling through too fast to separate. "There's a man," he said flatly. "That's what this is. You found someone else. I found myself." She glanced back toward the cottage, where Matthias waited inside, giving her space but ready if she needed him. "But yes, I found someone who treats me like I matter, who asks instead of commands, who sees me when I'm standing right in front of him. I can give you everything. You can't give me what I already have." Alara's voice gentled, not with affection, but with finality. "Go home, Your Majesty. Fix your kingdom. Learn to rule without using people as props, but do it without me. I love you." The words hung there, desperate and hollow. "No," Alara said. "You love the idea of me. You love winning, possessing, controlling. Love doesn't look like what you gave me, and I won't spend my life teaching you what you should have already known." The Alpha King stood frozen, a man unaccustomed to losing, to consequences, to doors closing that he couldn't force open. Finally, he turned. He walked away without looking back, leaving no guards, no threats, no promises to return. Just empty space where a king had knelt and learned that some things, once broken, cannot be reclaimed. Alara watched until he disappeared into the forest. Then she turned toward the cottage, toward warmth and sawdust, and a man who'd never needed a crown to treat her like she mattered. She walked inside and closed the door.